The conference room aboard the Galactic Council's flagship Eternal Dominion had seen many tense negotiations over the centuries, but nothing quite like this. Blood still dripped from the polished titanium table where Admiral's severed head had rolled to a stop just moments before. The massive's compound eyes stared lifeless at the ceiling while his mandibles hung open in permanent shock. Captain stood at the far end of the table, his human hands still stained with purple alien blood. He wasn't breathing hard despite having just decapitated a being twice his size with nothing but a ceremonial blade. The dozen remaining council members sat frozen in their seats, their various alien forms trembling with a mixture of terror and disbelief. "Now then," said calmly, wiping his hands on a cloth napkin as if he'd just finished a meal, "I believe we were discussing surrender terms." The delegate, a tall crystalline being whose body chimed like wind chimes when nervous, was the first to find his voice. You just murdered an admiral of the Galactic Fleet." His brown eyes remained steady as he looked around the room. "Admiral drew his weapon first. I simply responded faster." He gestured toward the ornate plasma pistol still clutched in the dead Admiral's lower right appendage. "Your own security recordings will confirm this was self-defense." Council Leader Thane, a reptilian with scales that shifted from green to deep purple when agitated, slowly rose from his seat. His massive frame towered over even the other aliens present, standing nearly 3 meters tall. "Human, do you have any idea what you have done? Admiral commanded the Third Fleet. His death will not go unanswered." "I'm counting on it," replied, moving around the table with deliberate slowness. Each step echoed in the suddenly quiet room. "You see, Counselor Thane, your Third Fleet is currently being systematically destroyed by my people as we speak. Admiral's death merely confirms what many of you have suspected but refused to acknowledge." The ethereal representative, a being of pure energy contained within a shimmering force field, pulsed with agitation. "Impossible. Humans are a primitive species. You have barely achieved faster-than-light travel. Our intelligence reports indicate you possess no significant military capabilities." Smiled, and somehow that expression was more unsettling than his previous violence. "Your intelligence reports are woefully inadequate, has been for quite some time." He reached into his jacket and several council members flinched, expecting another weapon. Instead, he produced a small data pad. "Let me share some more current information." The holographic display above the conference table flickered to life, showing real-time battle footage from across the galaxy. Ships bearing the distinctive design aesthetics of human engineering were systematically dismantling Council fleet formations with ruthless efficiency. The vessels moved with impossible coordination, their weapons cutting through alien shields like they were made of paper. "Sector 7 Alpha," narrated as the images shifted. "Your Second Fleet engaged what they believed to be a small human scouting force 6 hours ago. 47 Council ships destroyed. 0 human casualties." The display changed again, showing massive orbital installations around a gas giant erupting in silent explosions. "The mining facility, strategic resource center for the Council's war effort, currently generating no resources at all." Counselor Thane's scales had shifted to a deep, angry red. "These images could be fabricated." "They could be," agreed, "but we both know they're not." He touched another control on his data pad. "Fleet Admiral Harrison, please provide our council friends with a demonstration." The voice that emerged from the room's communication system was crisp and professional. "Target selected, Captain. Precision strike incoming." Through the massive viewing ports that dominated one wall of the conference room, the assembled council members watched in horror as a pinpoint beam of energy lanced down from somewhere beyond visual range. It struck the council's military academy on the planet below, vaporizing the entire complex in a brilliant flash of light. 2,000 of the council's finest military cadets, observed matter-of-factly. Gone in 1.3 seconds. The strike came from a distance of 40,000 kilometers. Your point defense systems didn't even detect the incoming fire. The aquatic delegate, whose transparent body revealed frantically pulsing organs, bubbled in distress. You're monsters. That was a school." "It was a military training facility," corrected. "And before you get too worked up about casualties, I should mention that the Academy was evacuated 3 days ago. We've been tracking your personnel movements since this war began. No one was killed." The room fell silent again as the implications sank in. The humans hadn't just achieved military superiority, they had demonstrated it while showing a level of strategic awareness that bordered on omniscience. Walked over to the nearest viewing port and gazed down at the planet below. Smoke still rose from where the Academy had stood. You know, when the Council first made contact with Earth 18 months ago, we were genuinely excited. First contact with galactic civilization, the chance to join a community of spacefaring species. We even prepared welcome ceremonies. He turned back to face the assembled aliens. Then you delivered your ultimatum. Submit to Council authority, accept integration into the lower castes of galactic society, or face extermination. You gave us 72 hours to decide. The delegate's crystalline form chimed softly. The integration protocols are standard for primitive species. It's for your own protection. Protection, repeated, tasting the word. You wanted to strip mine relocate our population to labor camps, and use our genetic material for your breeding programs. That's an interesting definition of protection. Council leader Thane attempted to reassert authority. Human, your species lacks the technological and biological advantages necessary for independent survival in the galactic community. Integration under Council guidance ensures your continuation. Our continuation as slaves, said flatly. We took a vote, it was unanimous, we politely declined. The ethereal pulsed with what might have been confusion. Our records indicate no formal response was transmitted. Oh, but we did respond, smiled again. We've been responding for the past 18 months. Every Council survey ship that entered our territory, every integration specialist sent to study our defenses, every communication probe launched toward Earth, they all received very clear responses. He activated his data pad again. The holographic display showed a star map with hundreds of red X marks scattered across dozens of sectors. 437 Council vessels, all destroyed while peacefully violating our borders. We tried to be subtle at first, making the incidents look like accidents or equipment failures, but you kept sending more ships. The aquatic delegate was vibrating with shock. The missing survey fleets, the communications blackouts, that was all you. We gave you 18 months to reconsider your position, said. 18 months to recognize that perhaps humanity wasn't as primitive as your initial assessment suggested, but you interpreted our restraint as weakness. Councillor Thane's massive fists clenched. Even if these claims are true, you are still vastly outnumbered. The full might of the Galactic Council represents over 300 species and 10,000 worlds. Impressive numbers, acknowledged. Unfortunately for you, we've spent the last 2 years studying every one of those species and worlds. We know your trade routes, your military deployments, your industrial capacities, and your political structures. We know which species are satisfied with Council membership and which ones are less enthusiastic about their current arrangement. The implications of that statement sent a chill through the assembled delegates. Several began frantically working their personal communication devices. I wouldn't bother trying to contact your home governments, said pleasantly. As of 6 hours ago, when this meeting began, every major Council communication hub has experienced simultaneous technical difficulties. Nothing threatening, of course, just comprehensive system failures that will take weeks to repair. The delegates' chiming had become increasingly frantic. You've cut off the entire galactic communication network. Temporarily disrupted, corrected. We're not barbarians. Emergency services and essential civilian functions remain operational, but military communications, government channels, and interstellar coordination systems are currently offline. He walked back around the table, stepping carefully around Admiral's body. This brings us back to the matter of surrender terms. Surrender terms? Council Leader Thane's voice carried a dangerous edge. You seriously expect the Galactic Council to surrender to a single primitive species? I expect you to acknowledge reality, replied. Your military forces are being systematically neutralized. Your communication networks are compromised. Your intelligence services have been feeding you false information for over a year. And right now, there are human ships positioned above every major Council world, ready to demonstrate exactly how primitive we are. The ethereal's energy field flickered rapidly. You're bluffing. No species could achieve such strategic positioning without detection. Smile widened. Admiral Harrison, please provide targeting data for the Council. The voice from the communication system responded immediately. Prime, 47 strategic targets locked, Crystal Gardens, 62 facilities targeted, aquatic deep stations, 91 installations marked for precision strikes. Ethereal energy grid, complete network mapped and vulnerable, all strike packages ready for immediate deployment. The color drained from every face in the room, at least from those faces capable of changing color. Now, continued, let's discuss what happens next. You have two choices. Option 1, you acknowledge that humanity is not interested in Council integration and recognize our sovereign right to exist independently. In exchange, we'll restore your communication networks, withdraw from your territories, and pretend this entire misunderstanding never happened. He paused, letting that sink in before continuing. Option 2, you continue to insist on integration protocols and hostile actions against Earth. In that case, the Galactic Council ceases to exist as of tomorrow morning, and we begin the process of establishing a new galactic order with more cooperative leadership. Councillor Thane was struggling to process the complete reversal of the strategic situation. You cannot simply dissolve the Galactic Council. We represent thousands of years of cooperation. You represent a colonial empire that has grown complacent through centuries of technological superiority, countered. But technology evolves, Councillor, sometimes quite rapidly. The aquatic delegate found his voice again. How? How did a species that discovered faster-than-light travel less than a century ago achieve such capabilities? Considered the question seriously. Because you made a fundamental error in your assessment of humanity. You assumed that our recent achievement of FTL travel meant we were technologically primitive. What you failed to consider was why it took us so long to develop that particular technology. He activated his data pad one more time, and the holographic display showed images of Earth. But these weren't the pastoral scenes typically associated with human. These images showed cities that stretched from horizon to horizon, orbital installations that dwarfed anything in Council space, and manufacturing facilities that operated on scales previously thought impossible. We didn't develop FTL travel because we didn't need it, explained. We had spent the previous 2 centuries perfecting every other aspect of technology and industry. When we finally decided to reach for the stars, we weren't starting from scratch. We were adapting systems and knowledge bases that had been refined through generations of innovation. The delegate stared at the images. Your population centers, they're enormous. 12 billion humans on the alone, confirmed. Another 8 billion distributed across our solar system, all of them educated, all of them contributing to our technological base. When you have 20 billion minds working on problems, solutions tend to emerge rather quickly. The ethereal pulsed weakly. 20 billion? Our intelligence estimates suggested a population of perhaps 2 billion. Your intelligence estimates were based on energy signatures and communication intercepts, said. What your analysts didn't realize was that our technology operates on entirely different principles. Lower energy requirements, higher efficiency, and communication methods that your equipment couldn't detect. He gestured toward the viewing port again. The planet you see below us, according to your surveys, it supports a population of approximately 50 million across 6 major cities. The actual population is closer to 400 million distributed across 47 urban centers. Most of our installations are simply invisible to your scanning technology. The full scope of the intelligence failure was beginning to dawn on the council members. Everything they thought they knew about humanity had been carefully orchestrated misinformation. So, said, returning to his position at the head of the table, what's it going to be? Option 1, peaceful coexistence with an independent humanity. Option 2, the rather dramatic restructuring of galactic politics. I'm prepared to implement either choice, but I do need a decision in the next 10 minutes. Council Leader Thane looked around at his fellow delegates, seeing uncertainty and fear in every face. And if we choose option 1, what guarantee do we have that humanity will honor such an agreement? The same guarantee you had that we wouldn't respond to your integration ultimatum, replied. You'll have to trust that our actions will match our words. Of course, given recent events, you might want to consider that our track record on following through with our statements has been rather consistent. The room fell silent as the council members grappled with a situation none of them had been prepared for. The primitive species they had planned to integrate had not only refused submission, but had demonstrated the capability to destroy their entire civilization. The balance of power in the galaxy had shifted completely, and they were still trying to understand how it had happened. Checked his chronometer. 9 minutes remaining. I should probably mention that if we don't reach an agreement here, my government has authorized me to the silence stretched for another full minute before the ethereal representative suddenly pulsed brighter, their energy form flickering with what appeared to be rapid internal communication. We need more time to consider these terms. The Council cannot make such momentous decisions without proper deliberation. Shook his head slowly. The time for deliberation passed when Admiral drew his weapon. You've had 18 months to reconsider your position on humanity. This meeting was meant to be your final opportunity to choose a peaceful resolution. He walked over to the communication panel embedded in the conference table, carefully stepping around the spreading pool of purple blood. Admiral Harrison, status report on Council fleet movements. All major formations are maintaining defensive positions around there, Captain. No sign of coordinated offensive action. However, we're detecting increased communication attempts on emergency frequencies. They're trying to coordinate a response. Acknowledged, continue monitoring. Turned back to the Council delegates. As you can see, your governments are already attempting to organize a military response. That makes this decision somewhat more urgent. Councillor Thane stood abruptly, his massive frame casting a shadow across the table. You cannot expect us to capitulate to demands based on threats and demonstrations of violence. The Galactic Council has maintained peace and stability for over 1,000 years. Peace and stability, repeated thoughtfully. Tell me, Counselor, how many species have been integrated against their will during those 1,000 years? How many civilizations have been strip-mined for resources or relocated to make room for Council expansion? The leader's scales shifted to a defensive blue-green pattern. Integration protocols exist to prevent conflicts between species with incompatible technologies and social structures. It's a necessary process for galactic harmony. It's a convenient process for galactic exploitation, corrected. We've had access to your historical records for quite some time now. The Spiral Incident, the Vegan Agricultural Collective, the Silicon Valley Republic, 47 civilizations in the past century alone, all integrated for their own protection. The aquatic delegate's transparent form began to flush with a pinkish hue. Those civilizations were given the same opportunities we offered Earth. They chose integration over destruction. They chose submission over extermination, said bluntly, because they didn't have the capability to offer a third option. He gestured toward Admiral's corpse. We do. This crystalline structure was producing increasingly discordant tones. Even assuming your claims about military superiority are accurate, you cannot govern the galaxy through force alone. The logistics of managing 300 species across 10,000 worlds would be impossible for a single civilization. Smiled at that observation. Who said anything about governing? We have no interest in ruling the galaxy, Counselor. We simply want to be left alone to develop our own civilization without interference. The statement seemed to surprise several of the delegates. The ethereal pulsed with confusion. But if you possess such overwhelming military advantages, why not seize control? Every species that has achieved galactic dominance has established an empire. Because we're not interested in an empire, replied. Empires are expensive, inefficient, and ultimately unsustainable. We've studied enough galactic history to recognize the pattern. A dominant species expands their territory, absorbs new civilizations, spreads their resources thin, maintaining control, and eventually collapses under the weight of their own success. He activated his data pad again, displaying a complex chart showing the rise and fall of various galactic powers over the past 5,000 years. The hegemony of 9 lasted 800 years. The Crystal Empire managed 1,200. The collective achieved nearly 2,000 years of dominance before internal contradictions brought about their collapse. Counselor Thane studied the chart with obvious interest despite the circumstances. The Council has maintained stability longer than any previous galactic power. The Council has maintained the illusion of stability, corrected. Your own internal reports show increasing unrest among member species, resource depletion in core systems, and growing dissatisfaction with integration policies. The only reason you've lasted as long as you have is that no external force has been capable of challenging your authority. The aquatic delegate's organs were pulsing rapidly with stress. If you have no imperial ambitions, what do you want from us? Simple coexistence, said. Humanity develops independently in our own territory. The Council continues to govern its member species as it sees fit, provided those species have genuinely chosen membership rather than having it imposed upon them. Trade and cultural exchange proceed on a voluntary basis between equals rather than between masters and subjects. The ethereal flickered thoughtfully, and if we refuse these terms, his expression grew cold. Then we demonstrate that empires built on coercion and exploitation are fundamentally vulnerable to species that refuse to accept submission as their only option. The communication system crackled to life again. Captain, we're detecting movement from the Council's 4th and 5th fleets. They appear to be massing for a coordinated strike against our positions. Composition and numbers? Asked calmly. Approximately 800 vessels total. Mixed classification but heavy on Dreadnought-class capital ships. Estimated time to engagement, 37 minutes. Several of the Council delegates exchanged glances. The spoke first. The 4th and 5th fleets represent our most advanced combat formations. If they're moving against your positions, the decision has already been made at the highest levels of government. Nodded thoughtfully. I was hoping it wouldn't come to that, but contingencies were planned for. He touched a control on his data pad. Admiral Harrison, execute Protocol 7. Confirmed, Captain. Protocol 7 is now active. The holographic display above the conference table shifted to show a tactical overview of the surrounding star system. Icons representing Council ships were scattered throughout the display, but as they watched, new symbols began appearing seemingly from nowhere. Human vessels were materializing from what appeared to be empty space, surrounding and outnumbering the Council forces by at least 3 to 1. Stealth technology, the ethereal observed with what might have been admiration. We theorized such capabilities were possible but never achieved successful implementation. Different technological base, explained. Our approach to stealth involves manipulating local spacetime geometry rather than simply absorbing or deflecting sensor emissions. The result is true invisibility rather than mere concealment. The tactical display continued to update as more human ships revealed their positions. What had appeared to be a desperate last stand by a small human force was rapidly transforming into the most comprehensive ambush in recorded galactic history. 800 Council ships, observed, watching the display. Impressive. We have 1,200 vessels in position to engage them with another 600 in reserve, but numbers alone don't tell the complete story. He touched another control, and detailed technical specifications began scrolling alongside the tactical display. Your dreadnoughts mount graviton pulse weapons with an effective range of 50,000 kilometers. Impressive firepower, but limited by targeting systems that require direct line of sight for optimal accuracy. The specifications shifted to show human vessel capabilities. Our primary weapons operate by manipulating quantum field fluctuations across distances up to 200,000 kilometers. Targeting is accomplished through multidimensional sensor arrays that can track objects across subspace layers. Council Leader Thane was staring at the technical data with obvious concern. Those energy output figures, they exceed the theoretical maximums for matter-antimatter reactions. Different power source, said simply. We've moved beyond antimatter technology. Our current generation vessels operate using controlled singularity cores. Each ship essentially carries a miniature black hole that we've learned to tap for energy. The implications of that statement sent a visible shock through the assembled delegates. Controlled singularity technology was considered theoretical even by the most advanced Council species. This crystalline form was producing increasingly chaotic harmonic patterns. Controlled singularities, the energy densities involved would be. How is such technology even possible? 20 billion minds working on the problem, replied. When you have that many brilliant individuals collaborating on research, breakthroughs tend to happen more frequently than you might expect. The communication system activated again. Captain, Council 4th and 5th fleets are requesting permission to withdraw. They've apparently reconsidered their tactical position. Looked around the conference table at the stunned faces of the Council delegates. Admiral, grant them safe passage to neutral coordinates. No hostile actions unless they initiate combat. Acknowledged, Captain. The aquatic delegate was trembling visibly within his containment suit. Your people could have destroyed those fleets entirely. Yes, agreed, but destroying them serves no useful purpose. Dead spacers don't carry messages back to their governments about the futility of military action against Earth. The ethereal pulsed with weak light. How long have you been planning this demonstration? From the moment your integration ultimatum was received, said. We immediately began preparing for the possibility that peaceful coexistence might not be achievable through diplomatic channels alone. He walked back to the viewing port and gazed out at the tactical display being projected in space around them. Hundreds of human vessels were now visible, their sleek designs clearly incorporating technology decades ahead of anything in the Council's arsenal. The interesting thing about your ultimatum, continued, was how it revealed your fundamental misconception about human nature. You assumed that a species presented with overwhelming force would naturally choose submission over destruction. What you failed to consider was that some species would choose to develop capabilities that made the choice irrelevant. Counselor Thane was still studying the technical specifications scrolling across the display. The resource requirements for developing such advanced technology, the industrial infrastructure necessary. How did you conceal such massive undertakings from our surveillance? We didn't conceal them, said. We developed them in plain sight using methods your surveillance couldn't recognize. Every piece of infrastructure, every research facility, every manufacturing complex that contributed to our current capabilities has been operating openly in our home system for decades. The delegate managed to produce a coherent tone, but our surveys of the Sol system showed only primitive industrial development. Your surveys were looking for technology similar to what Council species use, explained. Nuclear fusion reactors, antimatter storage facilities, traditional metalworking industries. You weren't scanning for the signatures of singularity-based manufacturing or quantum crystalline construction materials. He turned back to face the assembled delegates. It's rather like a civilization that uses wooden wheels trying to assess the transportation capabilities of a society that has developed magnetic levitation. They're looking for the wrong indicators entirely. The communication system crackled once more. Captain, we're receiving formal surrender requests from 17 Council member species. They're requesting immediate ceasefire agreements and negotiations for independent status. The effect of that announcement on the Council delegates was immediate and dramatic. Several began frantically working their personal communication devices despite earlier statement about network disruptions. 17 species, the ethereal repeated weakly, a quarter of our membership. Species that were never enthusiastic about Council membership to begin with, observed. Civilizations that were integrated rather than joining voluntarily. They've been waiting for an opportunity to regain their independence. The aquatic delegates' organs were pulsing in rapid, irregular patterns. You've been in contact with them. You've been organizing a galactic rebellion. We've been offering alternatives, corrected. When we began monitoring Council communications 18 months ago, we discovered that a significant number of member species were actively seeking ways to withdraw from the organization. We simply provided them with information about potential opportunities for change. Council leader Thane's scales had shifted to a deep, angry red again. You've been systematically undermining the foundations of galactic civilization. We've been providing hope to civilizations that had given up on the possibility of self-determination, replied. There's a significant difference. The holographic display updated again, showing the positions of fleets from various Council member species. Many were maintaining defensive positions around there, but several were actively moving away from their assigned patrol sectors. They have withdrawn their fleets from border patrol duties, noted, reading from his data pad. The vegan collective is refusing to respond to Council mobilization orders. The Silicon Valley Republic has declared neutrality in any conflict between the Council and Earth. He looked up at the assembled delegates. Your empire is fragmenting in real time, councilors. The question you need to ask yourselves is whether you want to preside over a managed transition to a new galactic order, or whether you prefer to maintain control until the entire structure collapses catastrophically. The ethereal's energy form was flickering erratically. What you're proposing? It would mean the end of the Galactic Council as we know it. The Galactic Council, as you know it, has been ending gradually for the past century, said. Member species becoming increasingly resistant to integration policies, resource conflicts between core and peripheral worlds, growing demands for autonomous governance. We're simply offering to accelerate a process that was already inevitable. The communication system activated one more time. Captain, the Council's 7th Fleet has just declared for Earth. They're requesting coordinates for joining our formation. The shocked silence that followed that announcement was broken by the delegates' discordant crystalline chimes. The 7th Fleet is commanded by Admiral. Her own species is turning against the Council. Councillor Thane's massive frame seemed to collapse in on itself slightly. Admiral commanded the integration of her own 40 years ago. She's been conflicted about Council policies ever since. She's been in contact with our diplomatic team for 6 months, confirmed, along with senior officers from dozens of other fleets throughout Council space. Military leaders tend to appreciate honest assessments of strategic realities. He checked his chronometer again. We're approaching the deadline I mentioned earlier. I need a formal decision from the Council leadership. Option 1, recognition of humanity as an independent civilization with full sovereign rights. Option 2, we begin implementing our plans for galactic reorganization. The 5 remaining Council delegates looked at each other with expressions of desperate uncertainty. Everything they had built their careers on, everything their civilizations had accepted as fundamental truth about galactic politics, had been overturned in the space of a single conversation. If we choose option 1, Councillor Thane asked quietly, what happens to the Council itself? The Council continues to exist as a voluntary association of species that choose to maintain membership, replied. We have no interest in destroying functional political institutions. We simply insist that membership be genuinely voluntary rather than imposed through integration protocols. The aquatic delegate's voice was barely audible, and the species that choose independence develop their own political arrangements, said. Bilateral treaties, regional alliances, independent governance. The galaxy is large enough to accommodate multiple approaches to interstellar civilization. The conference room's environmental systems hummed quietly as the Council delegates struggled with the magnitude of the decision before them. Outside the viewing ports, the tactical display continued to update as more Council fleets, either from their positions or openly declared support for the human position. The empire that had dominated the galaxy for a millennium was dissolving before their eyes. Council leader Thane broke the silence first. You mentioned 20 billion humans working on technological development. That represents a level of industrial coordination that should have been impossible to conceal from our intelligence services. Nodded, seeming almost relieved to shift to a less confrontational topic. The coordination was achieved through methods your intelligence analysts weren't equipped to detect. We developed our communication networks using quantum entanglement principles rather than electromagnetic radiation. He activated his data pad, displaying technical schematics that made several delegates lean forward despite themselves. Instantaneous communication across any distance, completely undetectable by conventional scanning methods. Every research facility, every manufacturing center, every military installation has been operating as part of a unified network for the past 50 years. The delegate's crystalline structure produced a series of ascending tones. Quantum entanglement communication. The theoretical framework exists, but the practical challenges of maintaining coherent entangled states across interstellar distances were solved by approaching the problem from first principles rather than trying to adapt existing technologies, finished. That's been the pattern for most of our breakthrough developments. We didn't try to improve Council-style technology. We developed entirely new approaches. The ethereal flickered with what might have been curiosity. Your singularity-based power systems. The technical literature suggests that controlled black holes would be inherently unstable. Inherently unstable if you try to control them using conventional force fields and magnetic containment. Agreed. Our approach involves manipulating the underlying geometric structure of spacetime itself. The singularities are contained within artificially created pocket dimensions. The implications of that statement sent another wave of shock through the assembled delegates. Pocket dimension technology was considered purely theoretical even by Council standards. The energy requirements for creating pocket dimensions, the aquatic delegate began weakly, are provided by the singularities themselves, explained. It's a self-reinforcing system. The black holes generate the power necessary to maintain the dimensional barriers that contain them. Council Leader Thane was shaking his massive head slowly. The level of scientific advancement you're describing should have required thousands of years to achieve. How did humanity accomplish such breakthroughs in less than a century? Considered the question carefully. Because we had advantages that previous galactic civilizations lacked. First, we had access to Council scientific databases from the moment we achieved interstellar communication. We didn't have to rediscover fundamental principles that other species had already worked out. He gestured toward the holographic display. Second, we had the benefit of studying the technological approaches of hundreds of different species. Each civilization that the Council has integrated contributed their unique perspectives to our knowledge base. The tones became more harmonious. You've been analyzing Council scientific data for decades. From the moment your first survey probes entered our system, confirmed. Every scan you conducted, every communication you intercepted, every technological signature you recorded was simultaneously being analyzed by our research teams. The aquatic delegates' organs were pulsing with growing agitation. You've been stealing our scientific advances. We've been learning from freely available information, corrected. Council survey protocols involve detailed scans of local technology levels. You were broadcasting technical specifications every time you analyzed our development. We simply proved better at interpreting the data than you expected. The communication system activated again. Captain, Council High Command is requesting a direct communication link. They're offering to discuss terms for a general ceasefire. Glanced around the conference table. It seems your superiors have reached their own conclusions about the strategic situation. Admiral Harrison, establish the link but maintain our current defensive positions. Acknowledged, Captain. The holographic display shifted to show the communication interface. Within moments, the image of a massive appeared, his scales showing the deep green patterns of extreme age. The assembled delegates immediately straightened in their seats. Supreme Chancellor, Council Leader Thane said with obvious relief, we weren't certain you were receiving our status reports. The ancient's voice carried the weight of centuries. We've been monitoring the situation closely, Councillor Thane. Captain, I am Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Council High Command. I believe we need to discuss the current circumstances. Inclined his head respectfully. Supreme Chancellor, I trust you've been briefed on the terms we've proposed. I have indeed. His image flickered slightly as the communication system adjusted to the vast distances involved. I have also been observing the dramatic shift in fleet loyalties throughout Council space. 23 member species have now declared independence, and 17 of our own fleets have joined your forces. The numbers were even worse than the delegates in the conference room had realized. The ethereal's energy form dimmed noticeably. More concerning, continued, are the reports I'm receiving about human technological capabilities. My military advisors are telling me that resistance to your forces would be futile. I find this difficult to accept. Your military advisors are providing you with accurate assessments, replied. We have no desire to demonstrate our capabilities through destructive action, but we are prepared to do so if necessary. Supreme Chancellor was quiet for a long moment. Captain, I have led the Galactic Council for over 2 centuries. In that time, I have overseen the integration of 47 civilizations and the expansion of Council authority to every inhabited system within 50,000 light-years of our core worlds. His ancient eyes focused directly on, I have never encountered a species that approached the Council as an equal rather than as a supplicant. It is an unusual experience. Equality requires mutual respect, observed. The integration protocols you offered Earth made it clear that equality was not part of your proposal. The integration protocols have been standard practice for centuries, said. They exist because most species lack the technological and social development necessary for independent participation in galactic civilization. Most species are contacted by the Council during the early stages of their technological development, countered. They're given a choice between submission and destruction at a point when they lack the resources to choose a third option. Humanity was contacted after we had already achieved full industrial development. The Supreme Chancellor's scales shifted to a thoughtful blue pattern. Your argument suggests that the Council's expansion policies are fundamentally predatory. Your expansion policies are designed to identify and absorb civilizations before they can develop the capability to resist absorption, said bluntly. Whether that constitutes predation is a matter of perspective. The holographic display updated again, showing the current status of Council fleets throughout the galaxy. Nearly half were either maintaining neutral positions or actively supporting human forces. Captain, said slowly, even if I were inclined to accept your terms for Earth's independence, I lack the authority to speak for the entire Council. Such decisions require unanimous consent from all member species. With respect, Supreme Chancellor, you currently lack contact with 40% of your member species, replied. Those civilizations have already made their decisions about Council membership. The unanimous consent you're seeking is no longer possible. The truth of that statement was clearly visible in the tactical displays surrounding them. The Galactic Council's carefully maintained unity had fractured beyond any possibility of repair. What you're proposing would effectively end the Council as a political entity, observed. What I'm proposing would transform the Council from an imperial system into a voluntary association, corrected. Species that genuinely benefit from membership would continue to participate. Those that prefer independence would be free to pursue their own development. The ethereal pulsed weakly. And what role would humanity play in this new galactic order? The same role we've always wanted, said. We would develop our civilization independently while maintaining peaceful relations with our neighbors. We have no interest in conquering or ruling other species. Supreme Chancellor's expression grew thoughtful. Your species has demonstrated capabilities that exceed anything in recorded galactic history. The temptation to use such power for expansion must be considerable. Power without purpose leads to corruption and eventual collapse, replied. We've studied enough galactic history to recognize that pattern. Empires that expand beyond their ability to govern effectively inevitably destroy themselves through internal contradictions. The ancient seemed to consider that statement carefully. You believe the Council has reached that point. I believe the Council reached that point decades ago, said. The increasing resistance to integration policies, the growing independence movements among member species, the resource conflicts between core and peripheral worlds. The signs of imperial decline have been visible for quite some time. The communication system interrupted their conversation. Captain, we're receiving formal requests for protection from 31 Council member species. They're asking for human military guarantees while they establish independent governments. The effect of that announcement on the Council delegates was immediate and profound. Councillor Thane's scales had gone completely pale. 31 species, that's nearly half our remaining membership. Species that were integrated against their will and have been seeking opportunities for independence ever since, noted. We're simply providing them with the security guarantees necessary to make that transition safely. Supreme Chancellor closed his ancient eyes for a moment. When he opened them again, his expression carried the weight of inevitable defeat. Captain, you have systematically dismantled the political structure of the galaxy in the span of a single day. Whether your intentions are benevolent or not, the practical effect is the same. The political structure was already failing, replied gently. We've simply accelerated a process that was already. The choice you face now is whether that transition happens through managed negotiation or catastrophic collapse. The Supreme Chancellor looked around at the tactical displays, showing the dissolution of his empire. And if the remaining Council leadership refuses to accept these new realities? His expression grew serious. Then we would be forced to implement more direct measures to ensure the safety of the species seeking independence. That would likely involve the complete neutralization of Council military forces and the establishment of human peacekeeping operations throughout the former Council territory. Occupation, said simply. Temporary administration, corrected. Until stable independent governments could be established, we have no interest in permanent control over non-human territories. The aquatic delegate suddenly spoke up. You've planned for every contingency, haven't you? Every possible response the Council might make. We've planned for the most likely scenarios, confirmed. When you're dealing with the potential destruction of galactic civilization, thorough preparation becomes essential. This crystalline form produced a complex harmonic pattern. How long have you been developing these contingency plans? From the moment we received your integration ultimatum, said. We immediately began analyzing the structure of council authority and identifying the key pressure points that could facilitate rapid political change. Supreme Chancellor was studying the tactical displays with the eye of someone who had commanded interstellar forces for centuries. The speed and coordination of your operations suggests planning that goes far beyond 18 months. The detailed planning began 18 months ago, agreed. But the foundational research started much earlier. We've been studying galactic political structures since we first achieved interstellar communication capabilities. The ancient scales shifted to a pattern hadn't seen before, something that might have indicated grudging respect. You prepared for first contact by analyzing the political vulnerabilities of galactic civilization itself. We prepared for first contact by trying to understand the context we would be entering, corrected. We wanted to know what kind of galactic community existed before we announced our presence. And you concluded that the existing community was unacceptable, observed. We concluded that the existing community was unstable and potentially hostile to independent civilizations, replied. The integration protocols you offered Earth confirmed that assessment. The Supreme Chancellor was quiet for several minutes, clearly weighing options that had become increasingly limited. Finally, he spoke again. Captain, if I were to formally recognize human independence and acknowledge the right of Council member species to withdraw from the organization, what guarantees can you provide regarding the treatment of species that choose to remain with the Council? Species that genuinely choose to maintain Council membership would be free to do so, said immediately. We have no interest in destroying functional political arrangements that serve the needs of their participants. And the Council's remaining territories would be respected as sovereign space, provided they don't attempt to impose integration protocols on independent civilizations. Nodded slowly, and enforcement of these arrangements would be handled through diplomatic channels whenever possible, replied. But we would maintain the capability to respond militarily to any attempts to resume forced integration policies. The implications were clear. Humanity would effectively serve as the guarantor of independence for any species that chose to leave the Council, while the Council itself would continue to exist in a much reduced form. You're offering to serve as the galactic police force, the ethereal observed. We're offering to prevent the kind of imperial expansion that led to the current crisis, corrected. Once stable political arrangements are established, we expect such intervention to become unnecessary. Supreme Chancellor looked around at the delegates in the conference room, seeing defeat and resignation in every face. Counselors, it appears we face a choice between accepting these terms or watching our civilization collapse entirely. Do any of you see alternative options? The weight of the decision hung over the conference room like a physical presence. Supreme Chancellor's image flickered slightly as he maintained the communication link across vast interstellar distances. The assembled delegates sat in stunned silence, each grappling with the reality that their thousand-year-old civilization was about to undergo fundamental transformation. Council Leader Thane was the first to break the silence. Supreme Chancellor, if we accept these terms, what happens to the integrated populations? Millions of beings whose entire societies have been restructured according to Council protocols. Answered before could respond. Integrated populations would have the choice to remain within Council territory or establish their own independent settlements. We've identified over 200 uninhabited worlds suitable for colonization within former Council space. The aquatic delegate's organs pulsed with agitation. You've been surveying our territory for potential colony sites. We've been conducting comprehensive surveys of galactic resources for strategic planning purposes, confirmed. That information becomes relevant if displaced populations need new. The holographic display shifted to show star charts marking the locations had referenced. The uninhabited worlds were distributed throughout Council space, clearly selected for their strategic positions as well as their habitability. 200 worlds, the mused, his crystalline form producing contemplative harmonics. That would support billions of colonists. Up to 12 billion, based on standard population density calculations, said. Enough to provide genuine choices for any integrated populations that prefer independence to continued council membership. Supreme Chancellor studied the star charts with obvious interest. Captain, the level of detail in these surveys suggests exploration efforts spanning decades. When did humanity begin preparing for galactic colonization? We began comprehensive galactic surveying the moment we achieved faster-than-light travel, replied. Standard practice for any expanding civilization is to identify potential settlement sites and resource locations. Standard practice, repeated thoughtfully. Most species conduct such surveys over centuries as their territory gradually expands. You appear to have mapped half the galaxy in less than 50 years. Different approach to exploration, explained. Rather than sending individual survey ships to investigate systems sequentially, we deployed automated probe networks that could analyze multiple star systems simultaneously. The ethereal pulsed with renewed interest. Automated probe networks, the coordination requirements for such operations, were manageable using quantum entanglement communication systems. Finished. Each probe maintained instantaneous contact with central command, allowing real-time coordination of survey operations across thousands of light years. The communication system crackled with an incoming message. Captain, we're receiving formal independence declarations from 47 council member species. They're requesting immediate recognition and protection guarantees. The effect of that announcement was like a physical blow to the remaining council delegates. Nearly half of their civilization had just declared independence in the space of a few hours. 47 species, Councillor Thane whispered. The Council cannot survive the loss of so much territory and population. The Council can survive as a voluntary association of the species that choose to maintain membership, said gently. What cannot survive is the imperial system that was based on forced integration. Supreme Chancellor's ancient eyes were focused on something beyond the camera range, probably tactical displays showing the current state of Council territory. Captain, I'm looking at reports indicating that human ships are already deploying to provide protection for the declaring species. You were prepared for this level of response. We were prepared for various scenarios, confirmed. Mass independence declarations represented one of the more likely outcomes once Council authority was challenged effectively. You orchestrated this, the aquatic delegate accused. You've been planning the destruction of the Council from the beginning. We planned for the possibility that peaceful coexistence might not be achievable through diplomatic channels alone, corrected. The decision to declare independence was made by each species individually based on their own assessment of their circumstances. This harmonics grew more complex, but you provided them with the security guarantees necessary to make independence viable. We provided them with alternatives to continued subjugation, agreed. Every species deserves the right to determine its own political arrangements. The holographic display updated again, showing the current territorial distribution throughout the galaxy. The remaining Council territory had been reduced to less than 40% of its original extent, and even that was fragmented into disconnected regions. The logistics of governing such scattered territories will be nearly impossible, observed, which suggests that further political reorganization may be necessary, said diplomatically. Species in isolated Council territories might find it more practical to establish regional alliances or independent arrangements. The implication was clear. Even the reduced Council territory was probably not sustainable in its current form. You're suggesting the complete dissolution of the Galactic Council, the ethereal said weakly. I'm suggesting that political arrangements should be based on practical realities rather than historical precedent, replied. If the Council can adapt to the new circumstances, it may continue to serve a useful function. If it cannot adapt, then other arrangements will become necessary. The communication system activated once more. Captain, Council military commanders are requesting instructions. Multiple fleets are in disputed territories and need guidance on rules of engagement. Look directly at Supreme Chancellor's image. Supreme Chancellor, we need formal resolution of the current situation. Your fleet commanders need clear instructions, and the declaring species need confirmation of their status. The ancient was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing the final decision that would transform galactic civilization. Captain, if I formally recognize the independence declarations and withdraw council claims to the declaring territories, will you guarantee the security of the remaining council member species? We will guarantee that no species will be forced to accept political arrangements against their will, replied. That includes species that choose to remain with the council as well as those that choose independence. And enforcement of territorial boundaries will be handled through negotiated agreements wherever possible. We have no interest in territorial conquest, only in preventing forced integration policies. Nodded slowly. Very well. As Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Council, I hereby recognize the independence of all declaring species and formally acknowledge humanity as an equal sovereign power. The words seemed to echo in the conference room despite being transmitted across interstellar distances. The political structure that had dominated the galaxy for over 1,000 years had just voluntarily dissolved itself. Thank you, Supreme Chancellor, said respectfully. I believe this decision will ultimately benefit all galactic civilizations. We shall see, replied. The immediate question is how to manage the transition period. There will be chaos in many systems as new governments are established. Human peacekeeping forces are already deploying to maintain stability in declaring territories, informed him. We've prepared administrative support packages for species that need assistance establishing independent governmental structures. The aquatic delegate looked up sharply. You've prepared governmental assistance packages. Standard templates based on successful political systems from various galactic civilizations, explained. Each species can adapt them to their own cultural requirements, or they can develop entirely new arrangements if they prefer. Councillor Thane was shaking his massive head slowly. The level of preparation you've undertaken. This represents decades of planning for every conceivable contingency. When you're dealing with the transformation of galactic civilization, thorough preparation becomes essential, said. The alternative is chaotic collapse with enormous suffering for billions of innocent beings. Supreme Chancellor's image flickered again. Captain, I have one final question. Given the comprehensive nature of your planning and the overwhelming superiority of your capabilities, why did you bother with negotiations at all? You could have simply imposed your will through force. Consider the question carefully before responding. Because sustainable political arrangements must be based on consent rather than coercion. If we had simply imposed our preferred outcome through military force, we would have become the same kind of imperial power that we objected to in the Council. You believe in the principles you've been advocating, observed. We believe that civilizations should have the right to determine their own destiny, confirmed. That principle applies to the remaining council species as much as it applies to the declaring species. The ancient's expression softened slightly. In 2 centuries of leadership, I have rarely encountered such consistency between stated principles and actual policies. Consistency between principles and actions is the foundation of sustainable governance, replied. Without it, political systems eventually collapse under the weight of their own contradictions. The communication system interrupted their conversation. Captain, we're receiving requests for trade negotiations from 63 independent species. They want to establish commercial relationships with Earth and other declaring worlds. The speed with which galactic commerce was adapting to the new political realities was remarkable. Trade relationships that had been restricted by council monopolies were already beginning to reorganize around voluntary partnerships. Trade negotiations will be handled through our diplomatic service, said. We're prepared to establish fair commercial relationships with any species that desires them. Supreme Chancellor was studying something off-camera again. My economic advisors are telling me that the loss of tribute from declaring species will require immediate restructuring of the remaining council budget. The economic benefits of voluntary trade relationships generally exceed the short-term profits from forced tribute systems, observed. The remaining council territories may find that their economic situation actually improves once they establish market-based trade relationships. They produced a series of harmonic notes that might have indicated skepticism. Market-based systems require equal trading partnerships. The technological gaps between species make such equality difficult to achieve. Technology transfer can help bridge those gaps, said. We're prepared to share appropriate technologies with any species that desires them, provided such transfers don't create security risks. The implications of that offer sent another wave of shock through the assembled delegates. Access to human technology would represent an enormous advantage for any civilization. You would share your advanced technologies, the ethereal asked incredulously. Appropriate technologies, emphasized. Medical advances, communication systems, industrial processes, technologies that improve quality of life without creating potential weapons applications. And military technologies, Counselor Thane asked, would be handled on a case-by-case basis, depending on the security requirements of specific regions, replied diplomatically. Our primary concern is preventing any species from developing the capability to impose forced integration policies on their neighbors. The holographic display updated once more, showing the establishment of human peacekeeping stations throughout the galaxy. The deployment was proceeding with remarkable efficiency, clearly following plans that had been prepared well in advance. Your peacekeeping forces are already operational, Supreme Chancellor observed. How many ships are you deploying? Approximately 3,000 vessels for the initial phase, said. That number will be reduced as stable independent governments are established and regional security arrangements are negotiated. 3,000 ships, the aquatic delegate repeated faintly. That represents a larger fleet than the entire Council Navy. Different strategic requirements, explained. Peacekeeping operations require more extensive deployment than traditional military formations. The truth was becoming clear to everyone present. Humanity possessed military capabilities that dwarfed anything that had previously existed in galactic civilization. The Council's era of dominance had ended not because of gradual decline, but because they had encountered a species that operated on an entirely different scale of power. Captain, said slowly, I believe we have reached an understanding. The Galactic Council formally recognizes the new political arrangements you have established. We will cooperate with your peacekeeping operations and work towards stable long-term relationships with all independent species. Thank you, Supreme Chancellor. I believe these arrangements will benefit everyone involved. The Ancient's image began to fade as the 6 months later, Captain stood in the observation deck of the human diplomatic station orbiting Prime, watching cargo ships from dozens of species arrive and depart in a steady stream. The transformation of galactic commerce had exceeded even the most optimistic projections from his planning teams. Captain, came a voice from behind him, turned to see Admiral Sarah Harrison approaching, her uniform bearing the insignia of the newly established Galactic Peacekeeping Force. The quarterly status report is ready for your review. Accepted the data pad she offered and scrolled through the summary statistics. 17 new trade agreements this month. Economic growth averaging 12% across the independent territories. Only 3 minor border disputes requiring intervention. The aquatic shipping lane disagreement was resolved through arbitration, Harrison reported. Both species accepted our proposed compromise on transit schedules. And the former Council territories. Supreme Chancellor has established the reformed Galactic Alliance with 14 member species. Their economy is stabilizing after the initial disruption, and they've requested formal diplomatic relations with Earth. Nodded with satisfaction. The transition period had been remarkably smooth, largely due to the extensive preparation his teams had undertaken during the 18 months of planning. Any sign of resistance movements or attempts to restore the old system? 3 minor incidents, Harrison said. Some former Council military officers attempted to organize unauthorized raids against independent shipping. Our response forces intercepted them before any damage was done. Casualties? None. The raiders surrendered immediately when they realized they were facing human vessels. Smiled at that. The reputation of human military capabilities had spread rapidly throughout the galaxy, making actual combat increasingly rare. Most potential conflicts were resolved simply through the presence of peacekeeping forces. The observation deck's communication system activated. Captain, you have an incoming message from Earth, priority diplomatic channel. Route it to my office, replied. Admiral, walk with me. I want to discuss the long-term deployment schedule. They made their way through the station's corridors, passing representatives from dozens of species who nodded respectfully as they recognized. The captain had become something of a celebrity throughout the galaxy, though he remained uncomfortable with the attention. The interesting thing, Harrison said as they walked, is how quickly the economic systems adapted. We projected it would take at least 2 years to establish stable trade relationships between the independent species. Market forces tend to be more efficient than bureaucratic systems, observed. Without council trade restrictions and tribute requirements, natural commercial relationships could develop organically. They entered SI's office, where the large display screen was already showing the incoming message from Earth. The image resolved into President Martinez, leader of the United Earth government, sitting in her official residence overlooking the Pacific Ocean. "Captain," she said with a warm smile, "congratulations on another successful quarter. The reports we're receiving indicate that galactic stability is exceeding all expectations." "Thank you, Madam President. The transition has proceeded more smoothly than our most optimistic scenarios projected." "Which brings me to the reason for this call," Martinez continued. "The Global Council has voted to begin the next phase of our galactic policy. We're ready to start reducing our peacekeeping presence and transitioning to a more traditional diplomatic role." Had been expecting this conversation. The massive military deployment required to oversee the galactic transition had always been intended as a temporary measure. What timeline are we looking at? 18 months for a 50% reduction in peacekeeping forces. 3 years for transition to a purely diplomatic presence. The Council believes that galactic civilization has adapted sufficiently to manage its own security arrangements. Admiral Harrison looked concerned. "Madam President, there are still potential flashpoints throughout the former Council territory. Some species may attempt territorial expansion if they believe human oversight has been withdrawn. Which is why the transition will be gradual and carefully monitored," Martinez replied. "We'll maintain response capabilities even after the formal peacekeeping mission ends. But the goal has always been to establish sustainable political arrangements that don't require constant external intervention." Studied the deployment charts on his desk. "We'll need to prioritize regions for continued oversight. The spiral arm territories are still experiencing political instability, and the core worlds haven't fully adjusted to the new trade relationships." "Agreed," Martinez said. "I'm authorizing you to develop a strategic withdrawal plan that maintains stability while reducing our overall commitment. The American experience with global peacekeeping operations provides some useful precedents." The reference to Earth's historical experiences with international intervention wasn't lost on either officer. Many previous attempts at maintaining global stability had failed due to overextension and insufficient local buy-in. "One factor in our favor," noted, "is that the independent species generally want these arrangements to succeed. Unlike some historical peacekeeping operations, we're not dealing with populations that view us as occupiers." "That's been the most encouraging aspect of the entire operation," Harrison agreed. "Most species are actively cooperating with transition planning because they recognize the benefits of the new system." The communication system chimed with an incoming priority message. "Captain, we have urgent reports from the Outer Rim territories. The hegemony species are requesting immediate assistance with a refugee crisis." Frowned, the hegemony had been one of the more difficult transitions, with multiple factions competing for control after independence. "What's the nature of the crisis?" "Approximately 2 million displaced beings from the former mining colonies. The new government lacks the infrastructure to support them, and there are reports of civil unrest." This was exactly the kind of situation that could destabilize the entire region if not handled properly. "Admiral, deploy Peacekeeping Group 7 to provide humanitarian assistance. Full aid package including temporary housing, medical support, and food distribution." "Acknowledged," Harrison said, already working her communication device. "Estimated deployment time 6 hours." President Martinez had been listening to the exchange with obvious concern. "Captain, incidents like this one are precisely why we need to be cautious about withdrawal timelines. Some species may require longer transition periods than others." "Agreed," said. We'll revise our projections to account for variable transition requirements. Perhaps a regional approach would be more appropriate than a galaxy-wide timeline. The office door chimed softly. "Enter," called. The being who walked through the doorway was immediately recognizable despite the months that had passed since their last meeting. Council Leader Thane, the Massive who had been present during the original negotiations, now served as a regional coordinator for the reformed Galactic Alliance. "Captain," Thane said with a respectful bow, "I apologize for the interruption, but I wanted to speak with you about the refugee situation in hegemony space." "Counselor Thane," replied warmly. The relationship between humans and the remaining council leadership had developed into something approaching friendship over the past months. "I was just discussing deployment of aid forces. Do you have additional information about the situation?" "The hegemony government has requested that the Reformed Alliance provide assistance as well," Thane explained. "We believe a joint humanitarian operation might be more effective than parallel efforts." Exchanged glances with Admiral Harrison. Joint operations with former Council forces represented exactly the kind of cooperation they had hoped to encourage. "What resources can the Alliance contribute?" 3 hospital ships, a construction fleet for temporary housing, and approximately 50,000 aid workers, Thane reported. "Our logistics are less efficient than human operations, but we have cultural specialists who understand hegemony social structures." "An excellent proposal," President Martinez interjected from the communication screen. "Joint operations would demonstrate the viability of cooperative security arrangements." "Agreed," said Admiral, coordinate with Counselor Thane's forces. Combined deployment should proceed immediately. Harrison nodded and began working out operational details with Thane, while continued his conversation with Earth. "This situation illustrates an important point," Martinez said. "Successful transition to reduced human oversight requires the development of indigenous capacity for crisis response. The Alliance forces have been quite capable," confirmed. "Their intervention in the border world's trading dispute last month was handled entirely without human involvement, which suggests that regional security arrangements are beginning to mature," Martinez observed. "Perhaps we should accelerate transition planning for territories where local capacity has been demonstrated." The idea had merit, but remained cautious about premature withdrawals. "I'd prefer to maintain current deployment levels for another quarter while we evaluate the long-term sustainability of these arrangements." "Understood. Your assessment carries significant weight with the Global Council." The communication ended, leaving alone with his thoughts as Harrison and Thane continued their coordination efforts. The transformation of galactic civilization had proceeded far more smoothly than anyone had dared hope, but the real test would come during the transition to reduced human oversight. The observation deck's viewing port offered a perfect view of the constant traffic around Prime. Ships from dozens of species moved through carefully coordinated flight paths, their cargo holds filled with goods that would have been prohibited under Council trade restrictions just months earlier. "Captain," Harrison said, finishing her conversation with Thane, "joint deployment is ready to proceed. Combined forces should reach hegemony space within 12 hours. "Excellent work," replied. "This kind of cooperation is exactly what we hope to achieve." Thane approached his desk with an expression that might have been thoughtful. "Captain, if I may ask a personal question, do you ever regret the dramatic changes that followed your forceful negotiation methods?" Consider the question carefully. "Do you regret Admiral's death? The violence was unfortunate, but it prevented a galactic war that could have killed billions." "I suppose," Thane said slowly, "that history will judge whether the ends justified the means. History will judge whether the galactic community that emerges from this transition is more just than the one that preceded it," corrected. "The means were dictated by the circumstances. The Council's integration ultimatum didn't leave room for purely diplomatic solutions." The scales shifted to a thoughtful blue pattern. "Looking back, I can see that the old system was unsustainable, but at the time, it seemed like the only way to maintain galactic stability. Most imperial systems seem necessary from the inside," observed. "The perspective of the governing class is inevitably different from the perspective of the governed." "And what about humanity's perspective?" Thane asked. You've become the dominant force in galactic civilization almost overnight. How do you avoid repeating the Council's mistakes? It was a question that had been grappling with for months. By remembering that our goal is to make ourselves unnecessary. Every peacekeeping operation, every diplomatic intervention, every aid mission should contribute to the development of sustainable local capacity. A difficult balance to maintain, Thane observed. The temptation to control rather than assist must be considerable. Which is why we're planning systematic withdrawal from oversight roles, said. Power without accountability inevitably leads to abuse. The only way to avoid that outcome is to voluntarily limit our own authority. The communication system activated again. Captain, priority message from the Spiral Arm territories. The Crystalline Republic is requesting mediation services for a trade dispute with the Collective. Smiled, 6 months ago, such disputes would have required military intervention and council arbitration. Now they were being resolved through voluntary mediation services. Route the request to diplomatic division. Standard commercial arbitration protocols. Acknowledged, Captain. Thane watched the interaction with obvious interest. The speed with which commercial relationships have stabilized continues to surprise me. Under the old system, such disputes required formal council hearings and enforcement actions. Voluntary arrangements tend to be more stable than imposed solutions, explained. When both parties benefit from the relationship, they have incentives to resolve conflicts peacefully. Speaking of commercial relationships, Thane said, the Alliance has prepared a formal proposal for expanded trade agreements with Earth. Our economic analysts believe mutual benefits could be substantial. Accepted the data pad Thane offered and reviewed the preliminary agreements. These look quite reasonable. I'll forward them to Earth for consideration by the Trade Commission. Thank you, Captain. The Alliance is eager to demonstrate the value of cooperative relationships with independent humanity. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on. The species that had once demanded Earth submission were now actively seeking partnership arrangements. The transformation in attitudes had been as dramatic as the political changes. Councillor Thane said, I want to ask you something. If you could go back and change the Council's initial approach to Earth, what would you do differently? The Massive considered the question for a long moment. I would have approached humanity as potential partners rather than subjects for integration. The assumption that technological youth meant political immaturity was our fundamental error. An understandable error, said diplomatically. Most species that achieve interstellar travel do so gradually, developing political sophistication alongside technological capability. Earth's rapid advancement was historically unusual. Which is precisely why our standard protocols were inappropriate, Thane admitted. We should have recognized that unusual circumstances required unusual approaches. The conversation was interrupted by Admiral Harrison's return. Captain, joint deployment to hegemony space is proceeding on schedule. Early reports suggest the refugee situation is stabilizing. Excellent news, said. Any indications of the underlying causes? Resource depletion in the mining colonies, combined with economic disruption during the transition to independent governance, Harrison reported. Nothing that can't be addressed through coordinated aid and development assistance. Standard post-transition challenges, Thane observed. We've seen similar situations in several former council territories. The solution is usually a combination of infrastructure investment and technical assistance. Nodded, the pattern was becoming familiar. Species that had been economically dependent on council systems required significant support during the adjustment to independent operation. But once the transition was complete, they typically achieved higher productivity and living standards than they had experienced under integration. The important thing, said, is that we're seeing these challenges addressed through cooperative efforts rather than unilateral intervention. That suggests the development of sustainable crisis response mechanisms. Link was terminated. Captain, I hope you are correct. The galaxy is about to undergo changes unlike anything in recorded history. As the holographic display went dark, looked around the conference room at the stunned faces of the council delegates. The political transformation of galactic civilization had been accomplished in the space of a few hours, but the real work of building a new galactic order was just beginning. The silence that followed was answer enough. The ethereal pulsed once, very dimly. You're asking us to voluntarily surrender everything we've built. I'm asking you to acknowledge that what you've built was unsustainable anyway, corrected. The choice is between managed change and catastrophic collapse. Either way, the age of imposed galactic unity is over, with option 2 immediately. The targeting solutions are already programmed. It would simply be a matter of giving the order. The weight of that statement settled over the assembled delegates like a shroud. They were no longer negotiating from a position of strength. They were pleading for the continued existence of everything they had known.